where did you first get the idea for A Bright New Boise?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in religion, and I've written about, America's unique brand of Christianity, or brands, I should say, of Christianity before. But with A Bright New Boise, I remember I was watching this documentary about Fred Phelps, who ran, I should say, the Westboro Baptist Church, the sort of notorious anti-gay church in Kansas. And the most interesting shot of that documentary to me was this kind of pullback shot of this family, like Phelps family barbecue. And it looked so normal. You know, it was just like kids playing and, barbecues and things like that. But then they would kind of zoom into these kids and hate speech would just fall out of their mouths just effortlessly. And it got me really interested in sort of like how you can hold beliefs like, not that Will in the play holds beliefs like that, he doesn't, but how can you hold sort of beliefs that somebody might say are extreme or fundamentalist or at least very, very rigid? How do you negotiate that with modern life of like having a family barbecue and or even just like changing a tire? And so it just got me interested in writing a story about somebody who's trying to negotiate his worldview with modern life. And modern sort of like working class American life.
Is there anything in your life that has reshaped your relation to the play since you first wrote it?
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I wrote The Whale and A Bright New Boise kind of right on top of one another. I actually wrote The Whale first, even though it was produced after. And they've always felt kind of like companion pieces to me because they're both stories of a father in a very complicated situation trying to reconnect with an estranged kid. And I wrote both of these plays before I had a kid. And my husband and I became dads 5 years ago. And so revisiting both of these plays, there's so much depth of feeling and new thinking that I'm bringing to it now, having been a dad for 5 years. It was kind of I think I always knew I wanted to be a dad, but it was pretty theoretical back then. And I think also like, the stuff that I was interested in writing about and sort of like how modern American Christianity or this kind of brand of more fundamentalist, non-denominational American Christianity, how that sort of like affects modern life. That discussion, I think the volume on that discussion continues to be turned up really high, and the line between politics and religion is becoming increasingly blurred in the 10 plus years since I wrote this play, and so I think it's important to take the politics out of it and look at it for what it is. Like, what is this kind of faith? How does it interact with people? And look at it in a kind of like honest and human way, because I think for a lot of people who are going to come see this play, not everybody, but for a lot of people who come see this play, they're going to bring in a host of assumptions about who this guy is. And I think probably the first assumption they're going to make, that they routinely make about these kinds of people, is that, oh, they're crazy, or they're deluded, or they're simple-minded. And I had an experience of going to a non-denominational Christian school that taught the kinds of things that Will believes, that the earth is 6,000 years old, that that Christ is going to come again, and that we're likely living in end times. And so I know kind of what that feels from the inside, and it provides this like sense of community. It provides a sense of purpose, and it provides a sense of order to everything. And in that way, it's almost like this really warm sweater. But the problem is that the dogma can be so rigid that if anything about you or anything about your life is in opposition to that dogma, that the dogma is so rigid that any sense of opposition or lack of clarity just like destroys the entire thing. It's almost like that kind of faith is like a Jenga puzzle, like late in the game, where it's like if you take out one thing, everything just topples. And I think increasingly as like, you think about not that long ago, like say 700 years ago, which like, I know that seems like a long time, but that's like 12 to 15 human lifespans stacked on top of one another. It's really not that long ago in terms of like how long we've been here. A religious person, specifically a Christian person back then, was, say, working class, like Will is in this play, was likely illiterate, probably never ventured beyond the very small confines of their community and whatever labor they were engaged in, or their family. And they were told that, those guys over there in the robes, they have the keys to the kingdom. They have God's ear. They know what's going on. And you would have no reason to question any of that. And even if you did have the wherewithal to be like, well, wait a minute, like, why should I trust that? Then there'd be a comet or an earthquake or a solar eclipse or something that just was so intensely unexplainable that I think you'd be like, never mind, okay, I believe. Like, obviously, magic is real. Obviously, like God is up there. But now that we're all walking around with the constantly updating Encyclopedia of the Worlds in our pockets, it's becoming harder, I think, to hold that kind of literalist faith and negotiate everything we know about the universe with that kind of literal reading of the Bible. And so people are really digging in their heels. And I understand why, because I think many people see modern life as a threat to that kind of faith, and a faith that is deeply organizational to them, and is fundamental to how they live in the world.
How does it feel being back working in theater at Signature after working on the film adaptation of The Whale this year?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago today, The Whale was running at Playwrights Horizons, and we actually realized when we did the movie premiere here a couple days ago for The Whale, I realized on the way there that Darren had seen The Whale exactly 10 years ago that night. So it's like this weird full circle. I mean, it's been really amazing film. There's a lot, actually, of similarity between opening a movie and opening a play, but there's a lot of different stuff too. So it's been really exciting to kind of like play around in that arena and get my feet wet there, and I definitely want to continue, and walk through the doors as they're open to me, but I'm always going to be a playwright, and it does feel like this kind of part of Midtown is home for me, and so it's really nice to be back. I'm so happy to be going back into rehearsal in early January.
Is there a central theme in A Bright New Boise that you find yourself returning to?
I mean, I think the play is about a lot of things, but I think if the play is about one thing primarily, I think it's about how does one negotiate one's worldview with one's daily life, which is something that I think you don't need to be a fundamentalist Christian in order to, I should say actually, you don't need to be an evangelical Christian in order to have that question of like, how do I negotiate my worldview with the world at large? Because I think, and increasingly so, especially since I wrote this play, everybody has become pretty ossified. Not everybody, but a lot of people have become very ossified in their belief systems. And we're becoming increasingly at war with one another through these belief systems and through these conflicts of beliefs and interests. And so I think it's a discussion worth having. And yes, this is a very specific discussion about this guy who comes from this specific church in North Idaho who is now trying to re-enter a suburban life and meet his son where he lives. But I think we all do that in certain ways. We all, are presented with things that contradict what we believe. And people who live drastically different lives than us. And we all need to figure out how to negotiate that.
What excites you about working with director Oliver Butler on this play?
Yeah, so the play is being directed by the wonderful Oliver Butler. I've known Oliver for years and years and years, and I've been trying to work with him for a really long time, and I finally got him. I remember one of the first things I saw that Oliver directed was Blood Play. And I actually didn't see it in here. I saw it in Williamstown, and it's like one of the very few plays that I saw multiple times because I was just like utterly hypnotized by it. And it was so beautiful and mysterious and about so many things. And that sensibility really really appeals to me. I'm always attracted to the kind of theater where I'm always just kind of like, I feel like I'm presented with this field, all these people, all these perspectives, all these ideas, and it's my job to kind of just like wander through and like and take what I can and arrive at a place that isn't like a thesis statement. That like, okay, here's what the play is about, and here's what you need to know going forward, and you know, like you know, some of that kind of playwriting can be really effective, but it's just not the kind of writing that I'm interested in, and it's not the kind of playmaking I'm interested in. And I think that Oliver has that sensibility of just like his plays are about so much. And I think that's why I returned to Blood Play more than once, is because like I got so much out of it every time I saw it. And he's also just, I should say, Oliver is like one of the kindest human beings. He's such a joy to work with. He's such a good collaborator. He listens to everybody. He's invited me into every aspect of this production. It's been really wonderful. 10 plus years later, after writing the play, I think we just live in kind of a different America than when I wrote this play back in 2010. And so a lot of the discussions that I've had with Oliver have been sort of like how the play, even though we're not updating it, it's still firmly set in 2010, but how the story resonates very differently in 2022. I mean, interestingly enough, I set this play in a Hobby Lobby, and this is well before Hobby Lobby became sort of embroiled in the Supreme Court case that it became embroiled in. And so Hobby Lobby has become kind of a different cultural institution since I wrote this play. So I'm really interested to see how that resonates differently with audiences and how that kind of tells a different story in 2023.
Why did you set this play in the break room of a Hobby Lobby?
So yeah, I wrote this play set in a Hobby Lobby way before Hobby Lobby was in the news for the Supreme Court stuff. And the reason I set it there is I wanted to set it in, I don't know if Hobby Lobby is a proper big box store, but I wanted to set it in that kind of like suburban sprawl landscape. I had worked at a Walmart. That was my first job when I was a kid. I was a cashier at Walmart, and then I worked at the returns desk. And the break room is like a really interesting place because you do this like incredibly repetitive work when you're working at a store like a Hobby Lobby or a Walmart. Like, when I was a cashier at Walmart, it was almost like I'd go into a fugue state because you're just doing the same thing over and over. I almost like enjoyed it. It was like a weird kind of, retail meditation of just like scanning and doing the same motions over and over and over because you would almost constantly have a line. So that those 15 minutes or that you would go into the break room were really interesting because everybody had been doing this work and then they were coming together, and I found people to be like incredibly open with each other, very honest, and like kind of craving connection in this kind of like windowless fluorescent box. There was kind of a weird kind of purgatory feel to it.
Where do you see a bright new Boise in the landscape of your work?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's probably about 15 or so plays that separate A Bright New Boise in A Case for the Existence of God, but so much of the concerns are the same. They're very different plays, but I think like my plays have kind of always been on some level about the tragedy of isolation and the redeeming value of human connection. And I think Case was so much about that redeeming value of human connection, and in a way, maybe A Bright New Boise, even though it's ostensibly more comedic than Case, is more of an examination of the tragedy of that isolation.
How does A Bright New Boise explore familiar connection?
I mean, I think if once I realized that, like, my fundamental concern as a writer is like isolation and connection, I think writing about family was pretty natural because that's sort of our like base level connection. And I think with both A Whale and A Bright New Boise, those are kind of examinations when, like, for whatever external reasons, those connections were broken. And the question kind of in both of the plays is like, what is it to knit that back together? If these two people have been separated by years and years and years, but have this like really strong connection, this genetic connection, not only genetic, but just like familial and origins, you know, an origin story that they share. Like, what is it to try to repair that when they've lived such different lives for all those years? And so, you know, both Charlie and the Whale and Will in A Bright New Boise kind of meet these kids later on in their lives who are both kind of like unhappy teens, and they're both in their own ways searching and sort of like, oh, how can I best parent this kid in this like incredibly complicated situation when I'm in an incredibly complicated situation in my own life.
Is thinking about the workplace environment something you're conscious of when making this play?
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to make it feel like Will was entering into a community. You know, like he left a community, he was in this church, and this church was so meaningful to him. You know, I mean, he lived in the basement. I mean, this was his entire world. And so when it went away, his entire life was just in shambles. And so, like, yes, in the play, he is seeking this relationship with his son, but he is also entering into a new community that is drastically different than the one that he came from. And I think, like, a lot of the play is him navigating, yes, his relationship with his son, but also sort of like, what is it to enter into this new community that is so different from the one that I had before, and maybe offers, you know, a lot less of what I needed, you know, and what he needed from his church.
How are you exploring faith or religion throughout this play?
I hesitate to even say the play's about religion, because it's really not. I think religion is just sort of the container that one of these characters brings into this world, and it is an examination of like faith in modern life. And I mean, one of the big reasons I said it in a Hobby Lobby break room is I really think that, you know, it's one thing to I think kind of like in Case, like it's one thing to have this huge discussion, and in this case there's you know, discussions of religion that are happening. It's one thing to have those discussions in like a church or a monastery, but it's another to have it in like a break room of a Hobby Lobby. And I think there's actually like a greater need in a break room of a Hobby Lobby for that kind of like larger human connection. I'm also just, I think as a writer, I'm interested in discussions of faith because I think we don't talk about it enough. I mean, it's such a huge part of modern American life. And for so many Americans, for millions and millions and millions of Americans, their faith is foundational to their entire identity. But I think we're like way too scared to explore it in our narratives, you know. I mean, the amount of people who balked at the title "A Case for the Existence of God" was hilarious to me. that just because God was in the title, they immediately had their guard up. I mean, I understand it to a certain degree, given that like Christianity has been weaponized politically in this country for the last few decades in a really ugly way. But you know, it's there, and I think like ignoring it is not going to help us in the long run.